The definition of family and its values are different for everyone. Whether biological or adopted, planned or unexpected, fortunate or not, everyone deserves love and care from their parents. But what would you do if your own mother valued money and status over you? In Sheena Bora's case, she tackled this problem by reaching out to her. However, very little did she know that this would end in the worst possible of ways. Welcome to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. It is great to have you back. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at the case of Sheena Bora. Now, this story is a complex one. It involves a dysfunctional family, a greedy and deceitful mother, complications with money and media, and a glaring hole in the Indian judicial system. And frankly, I don't have much more to say about this one in the intro, as I don't want to give anything away, but this is definitely not one to miss. However, before we begin today, here is a quick message from our long-term sponsor, NordVPN. The year is almost 2023, and our worlds are ever more becoming virtual. Whether that's through online banking, messaging friends, shopping online, or simply watching a video like Coffeehouse Crime, most of us rely on the internet almost every single day. But here is one very important question for you. What are you doing to protect yourself and your data on the internet? To be honest, this sponsor couldn't have happened at a better time, as just 2 days ago I had something very strange happen which relates very well. After waking up 2 days ago, I logged into my messaging apps to see what was there, and while here I noticed that one of my friends was last online at 4 AM, which I thought was strange, so I asked her if she was okay and why she was up so late. But she replied with, "I was never up at such a time." After looking into it, she realised that she was logged into 3 devices, and what's worse, one of those unrecognised devices was last online at 4 AM. It turns out that this friend had become a victim of malware, and not only had it gained access to all of her messages, but her account had been used to spam hundreds of other chat groups too. Malware can be a virus, a trojan or a worm. It affects phones, computers and other devices, typically steals or destroys data, and may even secretly run in the background as legitimate software. It's often transmitted over email attachments, downloads or operating system vulnerabilities, and has the potential to seriously affect your device, your personal data and even your life. Thankfully, NordVPN's threat protection feature is an excellent way of detecting and destroying such attacks, and it's always on the lookout, even when not connected to a VPN. Whether for security, anonymity, or to access location-restricted content, NordVPN is a great companion tool for personal use. With NordVPN, your internet data stays safe behind a wall of next-generation encryption, meaning your data will never be compromised. This is great for me, as I often work in coffee shops, and knowing that Nord protects me while on public Wi-Fi keeps me at ease. Take control of your internet security today with NordVPN. It is risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And what's more, you get the best deal going through my link below. Visit nordvpn.com/coffeehousecrime for a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 4 free additional months. That's nordvpn.com/coffeehousecrime. Thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video, and of course thank you to you guys for supporting us content creators. And now with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Sheena Bora. Today we're exploring a country not yet covered here on Coffeehouse Crime. And so, jumping straight in, namaste. Welcome to the vibrant and ancient land of India, folks. Now, everyone knows of India, and although many of us think of it as a warm and dry country, it has a highly varied ecosystem, which consists of deserts, rainforests, grasslands, and even mountainous tundra. Random fact, and this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, but the country also has the largest population of tigers in the world. When it comes to the people of India, there is a lot to say here. But in short, the nation's population are extremely friendly and rich in culture, built on the philosophy, theology and mythology of their predominantly Hindu beliefs. In recent history, religion in India has become more diverse, but this hasn't stopped Hinduism still being the most practiced at roughly 79%. Now, Indian tradition is colourful, vibrant and full of celebration, and this can be seen from its many festivals right down to its delicious food. Today we're zoning in on India's largest city, Mumbai. As the country's financial centre, Mumbai is both crucial and affluent for a city. And to add to this, there are several ways it makes big money for the country. It's the heart of the highly profitable Bollywood film industry. And if you haven't watched Drive on Netflix yet, I can't necessarily recommend it. But it's good fun to watch either way. Anyway, located deep within the hustle and bustle of the big city, we find one of today's protagonists, 25-year-old Sheena Bora. Sheena was born on February 11, 1987 to her father, Siddhartha Das, and her mother, Puri Bora, who later on changed her name to Indrani. Her parents met in college at a relatively young age and had 2 children together, this being Sheena and her older brother Mikhail. But unfortunately, this happened at an age all too early for either of them, and shortly after the birth of their second child, their relationship deteriorated. The two split up not long after Sheena was born, and it's alleged that this was mainly due to a stark contrast in their professional lives. Where Siddhartha had no job at the time, Indrani was extraordinarily ambitious, and had a burning ambition to live a high life in the big city. Despite becoming the sole carer once her and Siddhartha had split up, she refused to be distracted from her goals, and sadly, this included her own children. In Indrani's eyes, she had work to do, ambitions to meet, and money to earn. So instead of looking after them, she sent Sheena and her brother away to live with her grandparents in Guwahati, while she moved 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles south to study computing in Kolkata. In the year of 1996, Indrani decided to co-found a recruitment company called INX Services. This was alongside Sanjeev Khanna, who was her new lover and now new business partner too. Moving forward, her business and romantic relationships would only be with rich, powerful men. And of course, this is something we will soon come to realize. The newlywed couple built their entire business empire off the back of this recruitment company. But sadly, throughout the years, their relationship turned into business only, and by 2002 they divorced. And rather conveniently, but later that same year, Indrani would marry her third husband, Peter Mukherjee. And Peter, he was quite the big shot. Being the CEO of media company Star India, it meant that Peter had a lot of connections, a lot of power, and of course, a lot of money. Now perhaps it was just a coincidence, but around the same time, INX Services began to expand quite rapidly. And so, off the back of this growth, both Indrani and her ex-husband decided to keep their professional and personal lives separately, giving way to her and Peter having a much more intimate relationship. All of these companies and relationships and even partners kept Indrani on her toes, and she was full of distractions pretty much every single day. But there was one thing that she seemed to forget, and of course I'm talking about her children. Back in Guwahati, both Sheena and her brother were still growing up with her grandparents, seemingly forgotten by their mother who was busy getting in and out of a suit. And it seems that Sheena resented her for this. On her 14th birthday in 2003, she wrote the following in her diary. "Oh, happy birthday to me, but I am not happy. It seems as if I've got nothing in my life, nothing. My future seems very pale to me, just depression has encircled me from all sides. Disgusting life it is. I hate my mother, that bloody bitch. She is not a mother, she is a witch, she must have been." It was only in the year 2006 that Sheena learned that her mother now lived on the opposite side of the country in Mumbai, and she had made the move more than 1,600 miles away to run her ever-growing business INX Group. Wanting to pursue higher education, while simultaneously desiring to spend more time with her mother, Sheena made a cunning plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And just several months later, she reached out to Indrani to ask if she could live with her while she worked on her bachelor's degree in arts. But the relationship between Indrani and Sheena was very strange at best, and she was only allowed to live with her mother under one strange condition. To everyone in and out of Indrani's world, Sheena would have to introduce herself as the younger sister, and no one was allowed to know the real truth between their relationship. Now, to this day, the reasoning behind this is still unclear, but there are several reasons why this may have been the case. Indrani was now living the high life, and as a businesswoman, it would have seemed weak if she had children so young and out of wedlock. The issue is so controversial in India, actually, that many mothers put their own names on their child's birth certificates, and in Sheena's case, this was no different. Now, the situation was far from comfortable for Sheena, but she agreed to the strange arrangements, and it was during this time that things became even more complicated. Indrani's new husband, Peter Mukherjee, already had 2 sons from a former marriage, and by pure coincidence, Sheena had taken a liking to one of them. The two started to hang out frequently, and after getting very close, things eventually became sexual. And by 2008, Sheena and Rahul had officially become a couple. Indrani was far from pleased by this development. Her daughter was dating her husband's son, which, fair enough, wasn't biological, but it did make them step-siblings. I guess this is understandable, but Indrani saw this as messy and not fitting for her image. And to everyone outside of the loop, both she and her daughter were now in a relationship with a father and son. In protest of the recent news, she sent her daughter back to stay with her grandparents for a while, hoping she would eventually come to her senses and see her side of the situation. But not long after travelling home, Sheena suddenly fell ill, and rather suspiciously, but Indrani made a great effort to supply medicine for her. Now you can probably tell where this is going already, but knowing that Sheena was ill, Rahul sold all that he could to get enough money together and then go visit her. After arriving, he realised that the results were not good, and he was shocked to see how weak and sick she had become. But one of the questions that kept entering his mind was, if she had been administered adequate treatment for so long, then why was she still feeling unwell? Something didn't seem right about this, so Rahul consulted a doctor. And, as it turns out, the medication Indrani had given her was actually a sedative used for treating schizophrenia. After learning of the very confusing news, Sheena quit the medication immediately, and, surprise surprise, her condition improved drastically overnight. The revelation sparked a massive change in the family dynamics, and after Rahul moved her to his own family's home, Sheena made the decision to intentionally grow distant from her mother. Eventually, in 2009, the star-crossed lovers moved into their own apartment in Mumbai, and with time confirming their compatibility, Rahul and Sheena realised how much in love they were with one another. And not only that, but from now on, they would never let Indrani get the better of either of them. By 2011, the couple were now engaged, and no surprise, this was very much to Indrani's dismay. But speaking of which, things were going very well for her too. She was now the CEO of INX Media, a branch of the company she had started. Indrani was now a well-established and successful businesswoman, and boy, did she have the money to prove it. Indrani knew precisely what she was doing. She had offshore bank accounts in multiple countries, and coy enough, although some were under her own name, others were under Sheena's. Now, it's no secret that the wealthy know how to use money to make more money. Sometimes this is via shady practices, and Indrani was no exception. And side note, but by the way, now that we know of Indrani and Sheena's relationship, we also know that it's highly unlikely that those accounts were made for her daughter. By 2012, which was 8 years since Sheena had moved to Mumbai and 4 years since she fell in love with Rahul, the relationship between her and Indrani had become entirely dysfunctional. So much so that in April of that year, Rahul was very surprised to learn that Indrani had invited a daughter out for dinner, which was very out of character for her. On April 24th, Rahul picked Sheena up from work, took her back home, and then dropped her off at the place that her mother was supposed to meet her. But upon arriving, he realised that Indrani was not alone. She was driving a silver Opel Corsa, and next to her was a chauffeur with a third man smoking a cigarette. Now, Rahul didn't recognise either of these men, but one of them was actually her ex-husband Sanjeev, who helped found INX Media. Waving goodbye to her fiancé, Sheena told Rahul that she'd be back later that evening, and that the plan was to go out for dinner and then perhaps a drink. But, unknown to her at the time, that would never happen. Kissing her goodbye, Rahul returned to his apartment. He wasn't worried about the evening, as, after all, this was just dinner with her mother. But come 8 PM, he still hadn't heard from her, and after trying to call her mobile phone, it went straight through to voicemail. The next thing he knew, he started to receive strange text messages from her. Sheena claimed that she was fine and had now made the decision to stay at her mother's home for the night. But something seemed off to Rahul, and all of this was very strange to him. Where she was previously adamant about being home for the night, this was all now an entirely different story. He persisted with his own phone calls and text messages, but all of the responses he got back became even stranger. She now claimed that she no longer wanted to be with him, and that she had found someone else and was much happier. None of this made sense, and Rahul refused to believe it. And as the days passed without any sign of his fiancée, his concern reached an all-time height when, a few days later, he learned that Sheena had allegedly emailed her work to resign. She appeared to be cutting all ties with her current life, and although it's surprising that it took him this long, but 1 week later, Rahul finally decided to report the situation to the police. But their reaction wasn't helpful either, as no matter where or when he reported her disappearance, all police stations rejected his pleas, and according to officers, Sheena was a self-responsible adult who had moved on. Now, this was all very shady, as none of the officers would consider a wellness check on her, let alone try and find her location. And when Rahul asked Indrani about her daughter, all she had to say was that Sheena was no longer happy, and had moved to the US for her studies. There indeed was nothing that Rahul could do. He loved his fiancée with all of his heart. But she had now vanished, the police wouldn't help him, and the last known person to have seen her had essentially given him the middle finger. And so, moving forward, weeks turned into months, and then months into years. And although Rahul stood by with bated breath, he never received a single word from Sheena. No phone calls, no emails, no letters, and no text messages. The suspense was agonizing, and it never seemed to leave him. But Indrani and his father held up to their story, and no matter how many times Rahul tried to reach her, Sheena remained silent. We're moving forward to the year 2015. Sheena's disappearance had persisted for 3 grueling years, but suddenly, that was when an unexpected event blew the case wide open. Following the circumstantial discovery of a man disposing of a bag of multiple firearms, authorities arrested him and brought him in for questioning. The man was known in the area as Shyamvar Rai, a local man from Mumbai who, interestingly enough, had previously worked for a woman no other than Indrani Mukherjee. After being taken into custody and interrogated, Shyamvar confessed that he was trying to turn over a new leaf, and in an effort to prove his good intentions, he was willing to expose an otherwise unexplained crime which took place 3 years prior. During these interviews, Shyamvar confessed that he was the driver to a murder plot 3 years prior, and, unfortunately, the murder plot involved Sheena Bora. Now, if authorities were willing to believe the driver, then the events which took place in April of 2012 are far darker than they could have ever imagined. According to Shyamvar, and for reasons unknown to him, Indrani had approached him with a plot to kill her own sister. In exchange for his services, she promised to medically support his entire family, and to add to this, she would pay for his children's tuition fees. Now, the offer was attractive to say the least, and even better, Shyamvar would not have to kill anyone, simply be the driver. With this simple request changing the lives of his family forever, Shyamvar reluctantly agreed, and just several Skype calls later, a devious plan had been made. He claimed to officers that, on the fateful evening of April 24th, 2012, he, Indrani and Sanjeev picked up Sheena from outside the National College in Mumbai. The young woman got in the back of the car and sat next to her mother, who then offered her a drink as she pulled away, pouring one for herself. After driving for a short period, Sheena began to get drowsy and eventually lost consciousness. And on her mother's word, the driver pulled over in a secluded back alley, where he and her ex-husband joined her in the back of her car. Shyamvar was then told to put his hands over Sheena's mouth, while Sanjeev held her by her hair, and just 1 moment later, Indrani allegedly throttled her daughter, an action that tragically led to Sheena's murder. Apparently, Indrani then coldly commanded Shyamvar to drive to her apartment in Worli. The trio then placed her body in a duffel bag, drove 60 miles to a small town named Penn, dumped it in a dense part of woodland, doused it in gasoline, and then set it ablaze. And sadly, that is where they then left her, burnt on the forest floor. It was only after Shyamvar's story had finally been told that authorities horrifically realised that Sheena's remains had been discovered over 2 years prior, and only 1 month after her disappearance. Sadly, due to the severe damage caused by the fire, it was almost impossible to identify anyone without an already assumed DNA connection. Moving back to the timeline after Shyamvar's confession, and after 4 days of discreet investigations, authorities believed that they had connected enough information to formally arrest Indrani and Sanjeev on suspicion of her daughter's murder. And to add to this, Peter Mukherjee was arrested several months later for conspiring with his wife and siphoning funds into bank accounts in his stepdaughter's name. Now, the events that followed are wild, and understandably sparked one of the most sensational court cases India has ever seen. Throughout the early stage of court proceedings, Indrani swore that her sister was still alive, and not only that, but she was still living in the US to escape her fiancé. This was despite the discovered remains being tested against Indrani's and Sheena's DNA, and not only did it confirm that the body did belong to Sheena, but also that she was the daughter to Indrani. In fact, Indrani was so uncooperative that it took months for her to even admit that Sheena was her daughter, and how she thought this would just slide is honestly beyond me. Despite being against the CBI, which is India's version of the FBI, Indrani was an extremely wealthy person and could afford the best lawyers money could buy. The case was ultimately dragged out far longer than it needed to be, and throughout the years, all information within the case became both confusing and inconclusive. And all in the meanwhile, Indrani refused all allegations coming her way, insisting that Sheena was still alive, and that the analysis could not be trusted. Sadly, the CBI struggled to build a solid case against Indrani, and all information and evidence they had put forward was either contested or passed off as circumstantial. They went as far as employing an expert to compare the discovered skull to living images of Sheena, and the court watched as pictures of her smiling face faded into one of a charred and hollow-eyed skull. But despite Sanjeev's and Shyamvar's confessions, the DNA evidence, the comparative analysis, and almost 100 witnesses, none of this was enough to convict her mother. Court proceedings began to fall apart, and in August of 2020, which was 5 years after his arrest, Peter Mukherjee was finally released on bail. Following this, and after multiple bail attempts, Indrani was eventually released on strict guidelines in May 2022. And even despite their own confessions, Sanjeev and Shyamvar were given the same treatment 2 months later. But despite all 4 suspects being released on bail, how about Rahul? Well, it goes without saying that a partner is always considered a suspect in all murder cases, as around 1 in 5 homicides are committed by the one you hold closest. But throughout questioning, Rahul denied any involvement in Sheena's death. He testified that Indrani had always opposed their relationship, and highlighted that Sheena's half-sister, Vitai, had warned her about her mother's resentment. Over the years of court proceedings, Rahul's character and personal life were targeted and assassinated by Indrani's defense, and even to this day he still gets called in for questioning. Now clearly this is not a healthy way to live, and Rahul constantly fears for his safety, wondering if he will be framed one day. With Sheena's death happening a decade ago, many of his answers to police are "I don't remember." And sadly, as of the time of this video was published, this is where our case stands, and all of those accused of murder are currently out on bail while the investigation continues. To be honest with you, something doesn't seem right with this case, and I can only imagine that Indrani's wealth and a defense team somehow granted her special treatment. In a usual case scenario, confessions, witnesses, and solid DNA evidence are enough to convict a suspect of murder. Yet here, it all seems, quote, circumstantial. And another strange side note, but to add to this, dozens of surveillance cameras were found to be broken or deactivated over the evening of her murder, which, if you ask me, is totally suspicious. Now saying this feels like deja vu from my previous case, but all individuals in India are innocent until proven guilty. But saying that, you can't deny that the most suspicious individual with the most motive in this case is Indrani. She despised Sheena and Rahul's relationship, had tried to split them apart, and once the two were engaged, upped the ante. There's an obvious motive behind Indrani doing this too. Due to India's default law on wills and death, if she and Peter were to die, and Rahul and Sheena were to marry, their inheritance would be given to them instead of going towards their own daughter Viday. She and Peter also opened several overseas bank accounts in Sheena's name, which, let's be honest, was likely due to tax evasion. So yeah, honestly, there seems to be a lot of strange and shady behaviour here, all centred around money. The only thing we are clear on, for now, is that, despite her mother's claims, Sheena Bora is no longer with us. DNA taken from the body at the crime scene directly matches her DNA, and if she were still alive, then she would have come forward to clear people of her death. Now, there is no doubt that Sheena had a troubled upbringing with her mother, but does that mean that Indrani was heartless enough to take her own daughter's life? Well, according to her, apparently not, and even still, to this very day, she is adamant that Sheena is still out there in a foreign country, living a happy and peaceful life. Just like my former video on Simone Strobel, but it seems like with this case, only time will tell. And this one in particular reeks of corruption, strange twists and turns. Sheena never deserved the treatment she received from her mother, and it's a real shame that the woman who was supposed to love her the very most was instead occupied with money and greed. Hopefully one day we'll find out what happened to Sheena Bora, and if that information ever comes to light, I'll be sure to let you know as soon as I can. Anyway folks, that just about does it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching another case today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or you learned something new, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. It really does help me and the channel out. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you think Sheena Bora was murdered by her mother, or do you think it was someone else? Let me know in the comments below, and of course I'll see you again very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, please remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.